The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt colder than the autumn breeze slipping through the cracked window. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, trying to push away the fog that clouded my mind. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the call button, but no one answered immediately. Minutes felt like hours and the silence wrapped around me like a shroud. I was alone. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of someone who might care. A nurse, a visitor, even a stranger. But there was nothing. Just an empty chair pushed against the far wall. A small table with a wilted bouquet someone must have left days ago. My heart sank, the ache deepening with every beat. How long had I been here? And more painfully, where were they? My children, my family, the people I had dedicated my life to, the ones I had raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice I had. Not a single face had come to see me. Tears stung my eyes, but I wiped them away stubbornly. I had never been one to show weakness. For over half a century, I had carried the weight of this family on my shoulders. My husband had left early, and I became both mother and father to my 3 children. I worked 2 jobs, missed birthdays, and stayed up nights nursing fevers and broken hearts. I was their anchor, their constant in a world that often felt unstable. And now, when I needed them most, I was invisible. I thought back to the days when the house was alive with laughter and noise, when the smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen and the worn-out couch was crowded with little feet and stories. Those were the days I lived for. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every penny saved was for them, to give them a better life, to make sure they never felt the absence of a father or the sting of loneliness. But as I lay here, the cold reality settled in. Maybe they never needed me the way I had needed them. The nurse finally came in, her face kind but distant, busy with her rounds. She checked my vitals, asked routine questions I barely heard, and left without a word about visitors or family. I held my breath, hoping for a glimpse of someone who cared, but the door closed softly behind her. I tried to call my daughter, hoping her voice would bring me comfort. My hands fumbled with the phone, but my fingers were weak, and the buttons blurred before me. When I finally managed to dial, it went straight to voicemail. I left a trembling message, my voice cracking as I begged her to come. Still no call back. I remembered how years ago, I had watched her leave the house for college, waving with a smile that masked her own fears. I had been so proud then, so sure she'd remember where she came from. But now silence. The days before this hospital stay had been a blur of pain and confusion. I had felt a sharp ache in my chest but convinced myself it was nothing serious. I thought I could handle it alone like I always had. I didn't want to worry them, didn't want to be a burden. But eventually, the pain became unbearable, and I called an ambulance myself. Even then, I hoped someone would be there when I woke up. Instead, I woke up to emptiness. I thought about the community I had been part of for decades, the church where I volunteered, the neighborhood gatherings where I baked pies and offered a listening ear. I was known as the woman who gave without asking for anything in return. I had helped raise not just my children but many others who passed through our small town. And now as I lay here, I wondered if any of that mattered. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines monitoring my heartbeat. I closed my eyes, letting memories wash over me like waves. I saw my son's first steps, my daughter's graduation, the family dinners where we all squeezed around the table despite the worn chairs and chipped plates. I had built this family with my bare hands, with love and grit and endless patience. But where were they now? I tried to remember the last time I had heard from them. The small phone calls that became less frequent, the canceled visits, the excuses about busy lives and distance. I had told myself they were just caught up in their own worlds, that they still loved me even if they couldn't show it. But the silence in this hospital room screamed otherwise. The loneliness was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of visitors. It was the feeling that all those years of devotion had been taken for granted, that my sacrifices were invisible, my love unreciprocated. I wanted to scream, to demand why they had abandoned me in my hour of need, but the words caught in my throat. I thought about calling my oldest daughter again, trying to reach out one more time. Maybe she was just overwhelmed, maybe she needed a reminder. But as I picked up the phone, my courage faltered. What if she didn't answer again? What if I was truly alone? The hospital door opened once more, and a young orderly stepped in, checking my bed and adjusting the sheets. He smiled gently, offering a few kind words, but I could see his schedule pressed him forward. He was no replacement for family. I lay back, the sterile sheets cool against my skin. The day outside was fading, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The quiet was broken only by the distant murmur of voices and footsteps in the hallway. I wondered if anyone out there was thinking of me, if anyone cared. I thought about my children's faces, the hopes I had held for them, the dreams I had nurtured. Had I failed them? Or had they simply moved on without me? My heart ached with a mixture of grief and disbelief. I had lived my life for these people, and now, as I faced the uncertainty of recovery, I realized I was fighting this battle alone. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Despite the pain, the loneliness, the betrayal, I knew I had to hold on. For myself. For the woman who had given everything and deserved to be seen, remembered, and loved. But the question lingered heavy and unanswered. Would my family ever come back to me? Days blurred into one another, each morning greeting me with the same hollow silence. My calls to my children went unanswered, their voices replaced by the cold emptiness of voicemail. I left messages, sometimes short, sometimes long and trembling with hope, but all met with the same quiet. The ache of their absence gnawed at me, sharper with every ignored plea. I tried to tell myself that life was busy, that perhaps they were caught up in work or family, that they needed time to process everything. But every excuse felt like a fragile thread unraveling beneath the weight of reality. I wasn't just invisible, I was forgotten. Lying in that hospital bed, I began to revisit the memories that now seemed to mock me. I saw their faces again, bright and carefree, as if yesterday's worries held no place in their lives. I remembered the countless times I had dropped everything to be there for them. Late-night drives to the emergency room, school plays I never missed, meals cooked and laundry folded without a single complaint. I had always been their foundation, the quiet force behind their successes and failures alike. But somewhere along the way I realized they had taken me for granted. The years I spent keeping the family afloat had been woven into the background of their lives, unnoticed and unappreciated. I remembered the birthday parties I had organized alone, the holidays when I stayed up all night baking pies and wrapping gifts, only to feel a strange distance growing between us. Flashbacks flooded my mind, moments when they brushed me off, said they were too busy to talk, or rushed out the door with a quick, "I'll call later," that never came. I had dismissed those moments as fleeting, telling myself that love didn't always show itself in grand gestures, that family was complicated. But now those memories felt like cracks in a fragile glass, and the glass had shattered. I began to question everything. Was I really as important to them as I thought? Had I been clinging to an illusion of closeness that never truly existed? The doubts gnawed at my spirit, making each breath heavier than the last. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my children even remembered the woman who had raised them, who had given them everything without asking for anything in return. I thought about my own mother, who had passed years ago. She had been the pillar of our family, and I had tried to follow in her footsteps. But unlike her, I was now abandoned, left to face this uncertain future without the warmth of my own children. The loneliness was suffocating. In moments of despair, I considered giving up hope altogether. Maybe I was better off closing the door on them, guarding my heart against further pain. But then a small, stubborn part of me rebelled. I still longed for their presence, for the simple touch of a hand or the sound of a familiar voice. I wanted to believe that beneath their silence, there was love, buried perhaps but not gone. Each day I watched the comings and goings outside my hospital window, the nurses bustling through the halls, families visiting their loved ones, laughter spilling from rooms nearby. I envied them. Theirs was a world where family held each other close, where bonds were tangible and unbreakable. My own family had become a ghost, drifting further away with every passing hour. I tried to reach out beyond my children, to old friends and neighbors who had once been part of my life. Some responded with kind words and visits, but none could fill the void left by those who mattered most. Their presence was a balm, but also a reminder of what I had lost. As the days stretched on, I wrestled with a growing sense of despair. The woman who had spent a lifetime giving was now left to receive nothing but silence. I asked myself if I was worthy of love, if my sacrifices had meant anything at all. I felt like a stranger in my own story, a woman erased from the lives she had built. Yet even in the darkest moments, a flicker of resolve remained. I knew I couldn't let this isolation define me. I had to find a way to reclaim my worth, to stand tall despite the cold shoulders and empty promises. But the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty, and the question of whether my family would ever return to me haunted every waking thought. One afternoon, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I remembered a time when my children were young and scared, and I was their refuge. They had come to me with scraped knees and broken hearts, and I had held them close until the world seemed less frightening. How had that love slipped away? Where had the warmth gone? I reached for the small photo album on the bedside table, its pages worn and edges curled from years of handling. Flipping through the pictures, I saw smiling faces frozen in time. Birthdays, holidays, school recitals. Each image was a testament to the life we had shared. A life that now felt distant and unreachable. Tears welled up again, but this time, they carried a mixture of sorrow and determination. I realized that while my family might have drifted, I still had the power to choose how I faced this pain. I could surrender to it, or I could fight for my dignity and self-respect. But the fight would not be easy. The silence from my children was a wound that refused to heal, and the memories of neglect cut deep. Still, I clung to the hope that one day, they might understand the depth of my love and the pain of their absence. For now, though, I was left in this hospital bed, surrounded by strangers and shadows, grappling with the bitter truth that the family I had given everything to had turned away when I needed them most. And in that silence, I had to find the strength to face whatever came next. The truth hit me like a cold wave, sudden and unforgiving. It wasn't just that my children hadn't come to see me, they had no real intention of doing so. The nurse, in a moment of unintended candor, mentioned the family's plans. They were talking about placing me in a nursing home, she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A place where I would be taken care of, removed from their busy lives and distant hearts. I sat up straighter, disbelief knifing through my chest. A nursing home? Was that what they thought I deserved after all these years? After every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every scraped knee I had kissed better? The words echoed through my mind, a cruel reminder that the family I had raised was now ready to set me aside like an old piece of furniture, no longer useful or wanted. I thought about the life I had built for them, the home I had kept warm and welcoming. I had been the one to hold everything together when storms came, the steady hand guiding them through their fears and failures. And now I was to be packed away, tucked out of sight, a forgotten relic in a place with cold walls and strangers' faces. The revelation ignited a spark of anger deep within me. Anger not just at them, but at the years I had spent believing they would be there for me. I had always told myself that love was enough, that blood meant something unbreakable. Now I was forced to confront the harsh reality that love can be conditional, and blood can be turned away. I tried reaching out once more, calling my son with a trembling voice, asking him directly about these plans. His answer was curt, almost rehearsed. "Mom, we have to think about what's best for you," he said, as if those words could erase the years of neglect. I wanted to scream, to tell him that what was best for me was not a cold institution but the warmth of family, the comfort of familiar faces. Instead, I hung up, tears blurring my vision. The man I had raised was now a stranger, his voice distant and unfamiliar. I realized then that I was facing a crossroads. Either accept this fate quietly or fight to reclaim my dignity and control. The nurses noticed the change in me. Where once I had been quiet and resigned, now I was restless, refusing to settle into the role they assigned me. I began asking questions, demanding to know my options, insisting on being part of the decisions about my future. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. I would not be a passive passenger on this journey. I remembered the strength I had drawn on all my life, the strength that had carried me through countless storms. This was no different. I would not be discarded like trash, nor would I let their plans dictate my worth. With the help of a social worker, I started exploring alternatives. There were community programs, in-home care options, places where I could maintain some independence and dignity. The process was slow and fraught with obstacles, but each small victory was a balm to my wounded spirit. Meanwhile, I confronted my children, not with anger alone but with the raw honesty they needed to hear. I told them how their neglect had broken me, how their plans to send me away felt like a betrayal deeper than any wound. I demanded that they see me not as a burden but as the woman who had given them everything. The conversations were painful, filled with tears and silence. Some words were said that cut deep, and some truths were too heavy to bear. But beneath it all, I sensed a flicker of guilt, a realization that they had taken me for granted in ways they hadn't understood. Still, the path ahead was uncertain. I knew that reclaiming my place in their lives would require more than words. It would take time, patience, and perhaps a willingness to forgive and rebuild. But I was ready to try, even if it meant facing rejection again. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the irony of it all. The woman who had been the backbone of her family was now fighting to be seen, to be cared for, to be loved. The roles had reversed, and the journey was bittersweet. Yet, through the pain and disappointment, a new determination grew. I was not going to be sidelined or silenced. I would stand up, speak out, and demand the respect I deserved. This was my life, my story, and I would write the next chapter on my own terms. The days in the hospital stretched on, but I no longer felt like a helpless victim. I had found a spark within me, a quiet flame of resolve that refused to be extinguished. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the truth and the courage to fight for my dignity. And so, in the midst of betrayal and sorrow, I began to reclaim myself, one small step at a time. I never imagined the moment would come when I would have to stand up to my own children, to lay bare the wounds they had inflicted and demand the respect I deserved. But as the days in the hospital stretched on, the weight of their neglect became unbearable. I made a decision. I would no longer be a shadow in their lives, a forgotten afterthought. I would fight for my place, for my dignity, even if it meant shattering the fragile peace we had left. The first confrontation was quiet but fierce. When my daughter finally came to visit, not out of kindness I could tell but out of obligation, I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. I told her everything. How their silence had broken me. How the plans for a nursing home felt like a verdict against my worth. I told her I was not a burden to be cast aside, but a woman who had given her whole life to raise them. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was also defensiveness there. A shield I recognized from years past. She tried to explain, to justify their actions with stories of stress and responsibility, but I wasn't interested in excuses. I wanted acknowledgement, accountability. I wanted them to see me as I was, not just their mother but a person with feelings, with needs, with a right to be heard. The conversation was raw and painful, words cutting sharper than any blade. Yet beneath the anger and hurt, something shifted. The walls they had built around their hearts began to crack, revealing glimpses of regret and sorrow. I pressed on, refusing to let the moment slip away. If this was to be the turning point, I had to make it count. When my son returned from a business trip a few days later, I confronted him as well. His initial reaction was anger, a harshness that stunned me. "We're doing what's best for you," he said, his voice cold and distant. But I held firm. "No," I told him. "What's best for me is to be treated with respect, to be included in decisions about my life, to be loved, not discarded." That night, the family gathered hesitantly in my hospital room, the tension thick and palpable. We spoke of fears and misunderstandings, of mistakes and regrets. It was messy, imperfect, but it was real. And in that rawness, I felt a flicker of hope. I knew, though, that words alone wouldn't heal the rift. Actions were needed, commitments to change, to rebuild trust, to honor the bond we once had. I set boundaries, clear and unwavering, about what I would accept going forward. No more silence, no more neglect. I demanded their presence, their honesty, their care. Outside the hospital, I began arranging for my own care, refusing to let their plans dictate my future. I sought out services that would allow me to maintain independence, to live with dignity, even if it meant stepping away from the family that had turned their backs on me. It was a painful choice, but one I made with quiet strength. The confrontation with my family sent ripples through our small community. Some relatives and neighbors took sides, some whispered behind closed doors. But I stood firm, unshaken by gossip or judgment. This was my life, my fight, and I would not be silenced. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. But each time I reminded myself of the woman I had been, the woman who had raised children, nurtured a family, weathered storms without complaint. That woman still lived inside me, fierce and unyielding. One afternoon, as I sat in the hospital courtyard, feeling the sun warm my face, I received a call from a friend who had witnessed the confrontation. She told me how proud she was, how rare it was to see someone stand up like that, especially to those closest to them. Her words lifted me. A reminder that strength often comes from the most unexpected places. The road ahead was uncertain. Healing would not be quick or easy, but for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of control return. I was no longer the forgotten mother in a sterile hospital room. I was a woman reclaiming her voice, her power, her life. And as the days passed, I prepared myself for what was to come. The challenges, the setbacks, the small victories. Because I had made a promise to myself. No matter what, I would not be pushed aside again. Moving into the supportive community was a decision born out of necessity, but it soon revealed itself as a new beginning. The facility was nothing like the cold, impersonal place I had feared. It was filled with warmth. People who greeted me by name, who listened to my stories, who understood the weight of loneliness and the need for dignity. For the first time in months, I felt seen. Each morning I joined small groups for coffee and conversation, sharing pieces of my past and listening to others' journeys. We were a patchwork of lives woven together by loss, resilience, and hope. The friendships that blossomed here were unexpected gifts, filling the spaces once occupied by silence and abandonment. The staff encouraged me to participate in activities that nurtured my spirit: gardening, art classes, even gentle exercise sessions. I found joy in tending to a small plot of flowers, watching them bloom as I did. It was a quiet reminder that life, even after hardship, could still flourish. Word of my story spread through the community, touching hearts and sparking conversations. People began to see the importance of caring for their elders, of honoring those who had sacrificed so much. I became a quiet advocate, sharing my experiences in local meetings and newsletters, urging families to cherish and support their aging loved ones. My children too began to change. The walls of silence they had built started to crumble as they witnessed the strength I had found and the new life I was building. There were tentative visits at first, awkward, strained, but sincere. We spoke of pain and regret, but also of hope and healing. Slowly we began to rebuild, not just as mother and children, but as individuals learning to understand and forgive. I won't pretend the journey was easy. There were days when the past threatened to overshadow the present, when memories of neglect cast long shadows. But each challenge was met with a resolve born from the depths of my experience. I had fought for my dignity and found a community that valued me. Now I was determined to embrace this new chapter fully. As I settled into this life defined by self-love and renewed purpose, I realized that abandonment, while painful, had not broken me. Instead, it had awakened a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was no longer just the woman who had given everything for her family. I was a woman who had reclaimed her story, who had found new beginnings in the face of loss. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow through my window, I sat surrounded by friends and neighbors. We laughed, shared stories, and celebrated the simple joy of being together. In that moment I felt whole. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love, even when it comes from unexpected places.